Now, up on the dais up here, we have Commissioner Ricky Arriola and John Woodruff, who is the Director of Finance, the CFO for the City of Miami Beach. And if these guys cannot explain what's going on with the GEO bond and answer any questions you might have for them, then I don't know who can. And to set this up even further, I'm going to introduce our Mayor, Dan Gelber, who is going to say a few lovely and wise words for the group. Thank you.
Good evening. I've lived in the city my whole life. I'm 57 years old, so I've been here 57 years. And if you were ever thinking about reimagining the city, that decision was usually made in the old days by two guys having lunch at Joe's, deciding they wanted something to be a certain way, and then lo and behold, it happened. And there wasn't a lot of community involvement. There was usually no community involvement. Things just happened, and people would look at it and say, what the heck happened here? Our city is much different right now. Our city is an engaged, activist city. And Miami Beach United is a very good example of that. We didn't have a Miami Beach United in this city. We didn't have groups that were out there concerned about preservation or concerned about their neighborhoods or concerned about public safety. And maybe a little bit of it is Facebook and all the organizing tools. But the truth of the matter is, I think people, especially now, are taking responsibility for their government. And the most important thing that they ever should do is to be informed. And I love what Miami Beach United is doing. I really appreciate it because, frankly, this GEO bond is not sort of the City Commission's GEO bond. It's your GEO bond, and you have to decide whether you want it. These folks who are here today who are speaking are one is a city official, the other is one of my colleagues on the commission. We also have a couple from the fire department and the police department, and they're really here also, by the way. That Eric is in the back, I just see him. These are folks who are here to answer questions as well. Because what we want you to do is understand the 57 projects that are going to be on the ballot. Now, there are 6 ballot items. The first 3 do not have anything to do with GEO bond. The Inspector General, the hotel, and the hotel rent. But the last 3 are the GEO bond. And you're about to learn about the process, but I just want to tell you one thing about this process. When we decided to do it, what we didn't want to do is to have 7 people sit around and decide what they wanted. Or 2 people at Joe's decide what they wanted. I'm sorry to be giving Joe so much press, although it's a great restaurant. I urge you all to go there. But the truth of the matter is we wanted to create a process that would embrace our residents. And you're going to see that we didn't just sort of sit around and say, this is what we want. The staff, professional staff came up with a big list. The commission made it smaller. Then we went and did outreach in numerous public meetings. We went online and created internet sites. People could rank things. We created a citizen committee. I see Ray Breslin is here. He was on the committee. A couple other people, I think, Joy, you were on the committee. But people from all over. Marie Peter from down south. Carolina Jones from up north. Debbie Leibowitz from the island. We tried to create a sense of people across the city to spend dozens and dozens of hours going over each of these projects and deciding on the metric they decided what they wanted. At the end of the day, the commission adopted 95% of the recommendations. The reason I tell you that is I think it's important that you know this process. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to keep saying this is not the commission's GEO bond, it is our residents' GEO bond. If they don't want it, because they don't like things in it, then they don't have to vote for it. But the idea here was to try to find a process that you could believe in, that was resident-centric, that was resident-driven, and that at the end of the day, if there are some things you may not like, you feel like overall it is incredibly important that we do it, and we wanted to give you the best options available, and that's what this was about. So I know Commissioner Arriola can speak to it, and is going to talk, as will John. The staff here are not to tell you to vote for it. John Woodruff isn't going to tell you to vote for it. He's here to give you information. I think Commissioner Arriola is strongly in favor, and as am I, by the way, because our city, frankly, has funded a lot of its capital improvement projects over the years through a GEO bond process. We did it 20 years ago. Our interest rates are low right now. We have the lowest rates for our property taxes right now that we've ever had in 50 or 60 years, probably ever. And so they thought it was a good time to, since it's been 20 years and the last one is ending, to do it again. But I just want you to know this is yours, and I love the fact that you all are informing yourselves. Look over all 57 of these projects, and if you like them, let other people know. If you don't, let us know and vote vote with your feet, because that's what's going to happen on election day. But this is your GO bond, and I appreciate everything you all are doing to educate yourselves about it. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening. Hello, I'm Dan Gelber, and it's my privilege to serve as mayor of our city. On Tuesday, November 6th, residents will make their voices heard on 6 important ballot measures. Among them is a measure creating an independent office of Inspector General to address fraud, waste, and abuse in government, and 2 items regarding a convention center hotel, one of which would dedicate the guaranteed rent payments the city receives from the hotel lease to fund stormwater projects, traffic reduction, and education. Additionally, you'll be asked to consider approving general obligation, GO, bonds to improve our city's parks, our neighborhoods, our infrastructure, and our public safety.
So here's a little information on these 6 items to help prepare you to cast your vote. One natural question is why now for GO bonds? GO bonds are how governments fund their long-term infrastructure needs, as current funding for capital projects is very limited. It's been nearly 20 years since the city last issued GO bonds. Our youth centers, with thousands of users from seniors to toddlers, are aging. Half of our city's fire stations need to be replaced in order to meet our emergency services needs. Miami Beach is facing the real threat of climate change, and these bonds include green and blue infrastructure and other resiliency enhancements. With this in mind, the city developed an initial project wish list of over $1.1 billion, stemming from over a dozen master plans, input from over 40 city boards and committees, and input from city commission and staff. The initial list was further reduced to a more workable number, $700 million. From there, the City Commission engaged the community to help rank and prioritize the project list, and reduce the total amount of the program even further. The mayor convened a GO Bond advisory panel representing a true cross-section of Miami Beach residents, including residents from Mid-Beach, South Beach, and North Beach. For over 2 months, the panel met weekly for dozens of hours as they vetted and evaluated projects with a resident-centric lens. They developed criteria to prioritize projects such as quality of life, return on investment, and cost of inaction, especially as it pertains to resiliency. A key part of the panel's review was the resident input received via various community events and online surveys. The panel made its recommendation to the City Commission, whose final project list totaled $439 million, 95% consistent with the advisory panel's recommendations. So, what projects made the final list? The Parks, Recreational, and Cultural Facilities ballot question includes several projects, providing major improvements to all Miami Beach youth centers, creating 24 acres of new park space, upgrading 20 existing parks throughout the city, and completing the beach walk from South Point to 87th Street and the Bay Walk from Government Cut to Lincoln Road, to provide residents and visitors with greater public access to the city's beaches and Biscayne Bay. The infrastructure ballot question includes neighborhood resiliency improvements and beautification to complement the planned stormwater projects. 25% of this GO bond directly addresses the effects of climate change, while many of the other projects address other resiliency challenges. Planting up to 5,000 trees citywide to provide canopy coverage and shade, increasing our green and blue infrastructure, replacing 25% of the city's sidewalks to improve walkability, and much more. The police, fire, and public safety ballot question includes replacing Fire Station 1 in South Beach and Fire Station 3 in Mid-Beach, which provides life-saving emergency services to over 60% of our city. Enhancing law enforcement technology by installing 26 license plate readers at strategic locations to aid crime fighting and prevention efforts. And adding security cameras in the entertainment district along the beach walk and in key commercial corridors. The full list of projects for each of the ballot questions is available at www.gomb2018.com. If the GO bond passes, the impact to a property owner would be $82 a year for every $100,000 of taxable value. This impact would be gradually phased in over approximately 10 to 12 years. Once the GO bond is approved, a resident oversight committee will be established to monitor all projects in the GO bond program and ensure accountability to the public. The Inspector General ballot question includes creating an independent office of the Inspector General in order to identify efficiencies and to detect, investigate, and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse of power in city government. The office will be empowered to review, audit, and oversee municipal matters, including contracts, programs, projects, and expenditures. The office would be granted the power to subpoena witnesses, administer oaths, and require the production of records. The $620 million renovation of the Miami Beach Convention Center is part of the city's effort to remain competitive and attract a new caliber of internationally renowned shows. With a large percentage of competing convention centers in the nation possessing an adjacent hotel, the Miami Beach Convention Center hotel ballot question is informed by previous proposals and includes approving the 99-year lease for the development of a Miami Beach Convention Center hotel, which would be entirely privately funded with no city funding or gambling as part of the hotel project. The hotel would include 800 rooms and feature an overhead pedestrian sky bridge connecting the hotel to the convention center. A separate ballot question, if approved by the voters, would dedicate the guaranteed annual rent payments the city receives from the hotel lease, over $16 million in the first 10 years alone, to fund stormwater projects, traffic reduction measures, and education in equal portions.
Thanks for taking the time to be informed, and please continue to be election ready. Make your voice heard and cast your vote on Tuesday, November 6th.
Good evening. I'm Commissioner Ricky Arriola. I think I know most of you. And for those of you who I don't know, I'm here to answer your questions. I'm going to stick around afterwards to get to know you. You have any other questions, you want to talk to me by individual. Louder? Okay. Can you turn this up, or just I'll talk louder? Anyway. So it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. So I was wondering how I wanted to sort of kick off our dialogue tonight, and I think rather than just John and I just talk to you, we want to talk with you and hear your questions and thoughts. I want to ask just a couple of questions of all of you, and I'm not going to ask you how you're going to vote, but I just kind of want to understand where you are in your thought process. How many people here know how they're going to vote for the Inspector General? It's about half, okay. How about the hotel? About the same. And what about the GeoBond? So it's about the same. Okay, all right. So that's good to know. So I think roughly the people who had their hand up for all three. I'm here tonight to speak more specifically about the GeoBond, the General Obligation Bond, and I'll let our CFO get into the technicalities of what a General Obligation Bond is if you guys want to get into the technicalities. But I want to frame the discussion of why I'm strongly supporting the GeoBond and why there's strong commission support, strong support in general throughout the community. Cities go up and down, cities ebb and flow. For those of us who are really interested in this topic of how cities succeed or fail, a lot of it has to do with what's going on in the community, the investments that a city makes, the investments that cities don't make. Right now, the city of Miami Beach, as wonderful as it is, has not really been, as a city, investing in its future. Most of the investments that are happening in our city come from the private sector. The city right now, the last time the city actively invested in the city in a meaningful way on capital projects was 20 years ago when we did a $90 million GeoBond, and my great friend, and I call her my boss, Nancy Liebman, was on the commission. That was the last time we did it. And for a city this size, we have right now $33 billion, I think it's $33 billion in taxable assessed property values. That's not the replacement value, it'll probably be closer to $100 billion. We have less than 1% of our bonding capacity is being used, meaning we are underinvested in our city. Right now we have a backlog of over $70 million in deferred maintenance for all the city-owned properties. The time is right for the city to step up and invest in our future. We have all-time low interest rates in the market, all-time high credit ratings for our city, all-time low millage rates for property owners, and we have just a great backlog of community projects that the city, our residents, have been demanding of us. Things like parks, more trees, improved sidewalks, improved streets, for our first responders, public safety, fire stations, police stations, new technology that's available. Like we said, we saw in the video, security cameras to keep us safe, license plate readers, new lighting throughout the city to make dark places in our city safe. And of course, the topic that is, I think, very top of mind for all of us is sea level rise and climate change, and the need to build resiliency to protect what for most of us is our most valuable asset, our homes. So things like investing in our seawalls, pumps, raising our roads, all of these things require money. That is why I'm so strongly supportive of this GEO bond. We will walk through any project you want us to talk to you specifically about. We'll talk to you about the impact on taxes, what it means to your pocketbook, how these bonds would be issued, etc. We get into the technicalities, but I wanted to just sort of a macro level urge you to support this GEO bond. It is imperative for the city's future. The cost of not doing it, I think, would be a calamity. If we don't invest in our parks, if we don't invest in our streets, if we don't invest in our resiliency programs, if we don't invest in our first responder technology and facilities, I fear for the long-term future of our city. So please inform yourself. Ask us any questions. I am spending every single day for the next 5 weeks until election day on this very topic. Other very competent folks are going to talk to you about the hotel, about the inspector general, about other things. But my main focus right now is this GEO bond. It's that important to the future of our city. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
So, Tanya, Nancy, should we just start with the questions? Because what I don't want to do is come across somebody who's just going to talk you to death. We have the people in this room, myself, John, we can talk to you with pretty good detail about any of the 57 projects. We can talk to you about the process that got us here. We can talk to you about market conditions. We can talk to you about millage rates. But rather than just talk to you and bore you to death, I'd really prefer to hear questions from folks.
Yeah, go ahead and do it. I just thought that John wants to give a little intro on what...
You want to give a macro on the financial markets, the financial condition of the city?
And from there, go right into...
Okay, so I do get a lot of questions about how much this costs the taxpayer and how does this work? Because I find that there's, it's been 20 years since the last one. It's not something that a lot of people know a lot about. So let me cover some facts here. First of all, the numbers that have been put out there in terms of what does this cost you is $82 for every 100,000 of your taxable value you have on the property, right? And so we now have a cost calculator on the website that you can use. I actually have it on my phone here so that after the meeting, if anyone wants to do so, we can tell you exactly how much this would cost. So what will happen is you'll put in a number, and then you'll get a figure, and that figure is really what the cost is going to be in 2030. So that what I really want to stress with everyone is that this is going to be phased in over 10 to 12 years, okay? Because the way it works is we can't really spend $439 million immediately. So it's not like a house payment where all of a sudden you get up, you take this loan, and now you have to make payments on a $439 million loan. What we would do is we'd probably split this into 4 tranches. We'd probably start with about $150 million, and then 3 years later or so, we'd do another 100, and whatever's left. And we can't really borrow the next piece until we basically spent almost all of the prior piece. So that's why you'll see that, especially on the cost calculator, you'll see that there's a slider, whereas you move out in time, you can see how that changes. So that's just one thing I want to be real clear about. Another is who's paying this bill, really. So I've done some analysis of our property tax database that I got from the property appraiser. So let me just throw out some facts here. So of all the properties in Miami Beach, the homestead exempted properties represent about 24% of that total. But they only pay 16% of the property taxes. So interestingly, I got into some of the analysis. It turns out that 51% of homesteaded properties are actually have a taxable value less than $250,000. That was pretty surprising to me. So that means that 50% of homesteaded folks are going to max pay $200 in 2030. And I want you to know those are conservative numbers because we did not factor in if property values go up on your property. It would probably be somewhat less than that. So who is really paying on these bonds would be folks, commercial properties. Just for fun, I looked up the taxable value of the Fontainebleau Hotel, $362 million, and they would be paying $300,000 in 2030, in 10 to 12 years. I looked up the Convention Center Hotel. It's actually virtually exactly the same. That's what the estimate is to build it. And so again, that would be about $300,000. So just want to give you a little comfort that at least if you're a homestead property owner, I think folks have been surprised when we've used the calculator, at least at the last community meeting that we had over at the Wilsonian. It wasn't, you hear 439 million, and I think there's a certain flinch factor there that you might be surprised if you go ahead and plug that into the calculator. So that's just something. And I do want to underline that, we are in a period of historically low interest rates. So if you believe that we are in a rising interest rate environment over the next few years for the foreseeable future, then every year that we wait, we just would end up, let's say we waited and did this 2 years from now, we would just end up spending more money on debt service and less money on bricks and mortars of these projects. So those are just some thoughts I just wanted to put out there. And as far as the process goes, we get a lot of questions about, hey, where did all these projects come from? We have, over a dozen master plans. We've got over 40 boards and committees at the city. The mayor mentioned that an advisory panel of 11 folks was put together who basically spent their summer vetting these projects on behalf of the community. And, they took that list from about 700 million down to, they gave the commission 3 scenarios, about 350, 400, 450. They didn't even feel comfortable taking it below 350, just to give you an idea. So it's very difficult. We had over 500 people participate in the survey that we had, both at the community meetings that we did as well as online. So just to give you an idea there. And that advisory panel, I was very proud of the work that they did. They developed and applied over 10 prioritization criteria. They were looking at things like, is this helping with resiliency? Is there a citywide impact? How did the public support it in the survey? Does it reduce risk? What if doing nothing? So talking a little bit about, okay, doing nothing, but what does that option look like? Well, the city really has limited capital funding in its checking account, if you will. So when you say, all right, so if we don't do this, how else would we fund projects? Because I think a lot of folks are under the impression, hey, this is a pretty wealthy city. Why can't we just pay for these things? Why do we have to go into a bond? Well, first of all, bonding, especially geo bond, is the most common form of debt financing for a city. It's totally normal. It's actually, if you're an investor, it's also one of the most attractive and low-risk investments around. And so, if we aren't able to bond out projects, what we would have to do is pay for it from our ongoing checking account. So right now, that checking account is about $7 million, and half of it really has to be tourist-related. So oftentimes, we're able to shoehorn in capital projects that are in the entertainment district or along the beach, something like that. But for neighborhoods especially, we have very limited funding. So you can imagine with all the city's assets and all those needs, having, let's say, $3 million that we can use pretty much anywhere in the city gets used up pretty quickly. So if we said, hey, we have an existing project like the Par 3 that's been, waiting for years to get fully funded, and that, let's say the price tag's $13 million, we have $3 or $4 million from once upon a time that was budgeted for it. Coming up with that delta, $9–10 million, I'd have to try to set aside money for it 1 year at a time, just like you would in your home budget. And maybe 10 years from now, we finally have enough to do it. And then, of course, the cost inflation would probably be a couple million more. So, but we wouldn't be able to do anything else either. You see what I mean? So when we take a project like Fire Station 1, that facility is in dire need of replacement. That's $10 million. So what would we do in order to fund that. It would be very difficult. It wouldn't be an easy task, and we certainly would have to prioritize that and not be able to do a lot of quality of life type of projects. So just kind of wanted to open some of those costs. I think we have a question.
Okay, so I'm going to come around with the microphone, and since this is a neighborhood group in a small city, I'd like you to preface your question with your name so we all get to know each other a little bit. So this gentleman who's been very patient.
My name is Ted Weinrich. I'm on the Sunset Harbor Neighborhood Association Board and the Sunset Harbor Condominium Board, townhomes. I have a question for each of you gentlemen. For you, sir, you rang my bell when you said something about people who have homestead exemptions. And if you would repeat that nice and slowly for this man with hearing problems and 2 hearing aids, I'd like to be able to understand what you said. That's for you.
Okay.
For you, Ricky, this is a general obligation bond for capital improvements, as I recall. And somewhere in what you said was, oh, we have 700 million or something in back maintenance problems. Well, you're sure as heck going to have maintenance problems going forward on this GEO bond, and if you still have 700 million from before, you're sure as hell going to have more. Where is that money coming from?
One thing just to clarify, the numbers, in terms of deferred maintenance, it's 70 million, not 700. And just like Ted and I are friends, we serve on the same condominium board, because I'm not busy enough being a commissioner. I torture myself and serve.
Just a little.
But it's the same thing that we have on our balance sheet in a condo board. It's deferred maintenance. It accrues on the P&L, right? It doesn't mean it's due today. It just means that we're starting to budget for it, and it starts coming out of your operating budget every single year. So I don't want people to misunderstand that we have another $70 million, liability that's going to hit us in the face. It's part of it's an accounting function. But John, why don't you take the millage rate and actually explain how we handle our deferred maintenance, which we handle.
Well, how are you going to handle the maintenance that's going to come
Right.
due with this?
Yeah, okay, well, maybe I'll start with that. I want to start with, why do you see a project on this list like sidewalk improvements, which actually was #1 on the survey in terms of public support? Often I've heard from folks, we're a well-off city. Why does that even need to be a GEO bond project? So it's a good example that in the past, there's been this trade-off between having a low millage rate and not having a lot of money on hand in our current budget to fund those kinds of maintenance type capital improvements. So what we've done here is that we did an assessment, basically a scientific process to go through all of the inventory of sidewalks. They identified 25% of them are poor or in bad shape. So what we were able to convert, hey, if we replace those sidewalks, what would that cost? $13 million. So when you see the project list, you'll see sidewalk improvements, $13 million. So the concept here is get those sidewalks back up to a good place. In the meantime, our long-term strategy will be to try to beef up that current funding, that capital funding in our budget, so that we're not in this position in the future. That maybe you wouldn't see a project like this in a future bond. So this bond money can help us get to a good place quickly, and then we would try to ramp that up over time, so then we would be better off going forward.
How about my homesteaded property that you said something about?
Okay, so let's talk about that. So if you've been in your home a long time, you probably have a pretty low taxable value because you're protected by Save Our Homes cap from having your taxable value increase by more than 3% or CPI every year, right? And also, if you qualify for certain exemptions, like there's a homestead exemption that any homesteader can apply for, but there's also additional exemptions. I actually, when I was looking up the tax database, which is huge, I found 613 properties that pay none because there are so many exemptions and the property of their value is so low that they don't actually pay any property taxes. I thought that was interesting. And there's quite a few that pay less than, that have property value less than $10,000, just to give you an idea. So in your home, and I'll be happy to run the numbers here with you because I can even look up your property and find out what it is. A lot of folks who've been in their homes for a long time, they're probably going to see a fairly small bill, depending on what it is. I ran somebody's house recently, and it's worth $1 million market value, but their taxable value is only $300,000, for example. And so they're probably going to pay a small proportion compared to something like a commercial property or someone with a second home, a vacation home, something like that. Other questions?
Yes, I'm Roberta Kaiser. What I want to know is why all this had to be bundled together. How many projects are there?
57?
57?
Correct.
All right. We know about probably 4 or 5 of them. I'm very strongly in favor of the police and the fire department. They need this desperately. But how about the other 30 that we don't know about that you all are sneaking through in this bond?
Well, I take exception to the word sneaking through because we've had dozens and dozens of public meetings. This information is readily available on our website. We've had commission meetings. We've got boards out there you can take a look at. And this is being issued in 3 different tranches in the categories public safety, so to the fire and police issue. Generally speaking, parks. And then the last one is for infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, seawalls, that kind of thing. Nothing, 000 is being snuck through. I take strong exception to that. Everything has been abundantly publicly disclosed. We're going to spend the next 5 weeks doing it over and over and over. This is my second one this week. I think I've got another one tomorrow. My colleagues are all doing the same thing all over the city. The mayor was in North Beach last night. There's nothing being snuck through. I don't know where you get that idea.
And I would just add to that don't forget that advisory panel 11 peers basically reviewed these projects and went through a vetting process for 2 to 3 months on end. And they met weekly. They even had one day where they met all day long for about 9 hours. I think Eric put on screen a few things we just want to highlight for you. In addition to that cost calculator, we have a dynamic interactive map here where you can look up near where you live, let's say in the city, and kind of see which projects are around you. We have filters where you can look at all the projects, or you can look at parks, infrastructure, public safety. When we say the GEO bond, we're really talking about 3 ballot measures. They couldn't be all grouped in one ballot measure because by state law, they have to be like projects. So you'll see like public safety, neighborhood infrastructure, and you'll see park type projects. I also want to point out the citywide projects, because oftentimes maybe you look at a map and you'll say, okay, well, I only see a handful of projects near me. Well, these citywide projects are ones where it's more like a program, like that sidewalk improvement program we were talking about, street pavement program, where some of that money will likely be spent in your part of the city, but we don't have it broken out specifically like that. But that's the kind of thing where if you need additional information, there's an email address on here that actually goes straight to me, and you can also call me. And we have the community meetings that we've been doing. The next one is tomorrow, Thursday night at the Miami City Ballet, for example, where we have all the project boards, we have all the experts from the city that know all about those projects on hand to be able to answer additional questions. So we still have several weeks, so I would invite you specifically to learn more about those projects and where you end up and how you feel about them. That's understood, but I just want to at least point out to you the process of how some of these projects got vetted.
In order to give folks even further assurance, on top of all of the advisory boards that have recommended these 57 projects over many, many years, on top of the countless commission meetings we've had on this, on top of the countless community outreach meetings we've had like this, on top of the dozen or so GeoBond advisory board meetings that were held on this. And if this passes, the Geo Guidance Board that will be put as oversight. We also have a ballot question this year on for an Inspector General, which will provide yet another layer of watchdog protection of taxpayer money. And my good friend and colleague, Commissioner Samuelin, has really spearheaded that effort to get it on the ballot. I don't know, Mark, if you want to just talk real briefly about what the Inspector General might bring to this process. We can give Commissioner Samuelin the mic.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Arriola. Happy to, always happy to meet with Miami Beach United, my friends. Let me say just 2 words about the Inspector General concept, but most importantly, tie it back into the general obligation one. Inspector General is an independent watchdog. Leading organizations are always looking for independent checks and balances, and that's what the Inspector General is about. What do? What does that office do? They do a couple things. One, they help make City Hall be the best it can be, work as efficiently as possible. 2, if there are issues of waste, fraud, abuse, wrongdoing, they'll call those out. This is a real game changer, and because of that, because we want this Inspector General office to be as empowered as possible with such stature as having subpoena power, this calls for a change in our charter, our Constitution. So you'll be voting on this. The Commission has put this forward. I think this will have a dramatic impact on City Hall. I hope you'll give it consideration. I know I'll be voting for it. But let me tie it into the matter at hand as it relates to the general obligation one. Because fair question, you might say, well, you know, that planning looks good, looks like good projects. How do we make sure all this happens? And I think the Commissioner and our CFO have done a good job at outlining a few of those factors very well. But I want to highlight the critical role that the Office of Inspector General would play. That's what they do. They make sure the plans are executed. They make sure that there's accountability. They produce economic analyses. They produce statements and public documents that will guarantee the transparency. So if someone said to me, I like what you're doing, how should I feel comfortable? One, hopefully you see the work that's gotten to this point, but we are actually in a very important initiative setting up a separate branch of our government that will be charged to make sure this happens. And if there's issues or problems, believe me, you will have significant watchdogs in the form of this Inspector General. So while these things came down sort of separate paths, I think they tie together very nicely, and it's one of the things that gives me confidence to fully advocate for this, because I'm real hopeful you'll vote yes for the Inspector General as well.
Thanks, Mark. Question?
Yeah,
for this gentleman here.
Eric Schneider. I live in Bentley Bay, and we're about to get a park from Crescent Development that's going to be given to the city of over 3 acres if everything goes well. You spent a great deal of time on Plan A. What about Plan B if it's defeated? What's the plan? Are you going to be able to survive?
It's a great question. So what plan we have that doesn't pass? Well, one is we'll try again. We'll figure out why we didn't get the support, and we'll try again. At least I will. It's that important. I am not a fearmonger. I am not. It would be really unwise not to support this, because you just look at your own home, your own business. If you don't invest in it, it's not going to appreciate in value. We know that there's sea level rise. And whether or not you believe in climate change and sea level rise, the market out there believes in it. So banks, insurance companies, buyers of your home are skittish. If they see the city is not going to invest in hardening the city and fortifying it against inclement weather and sea level rise, that's not going to help your property value go up. To the extent we have cracked sidewalks and streets that are in disrepair, to the extent that our parks look dumpy, to the extent that we can't keep our public safe because we won't make the required investments in public safety technology that's available today, I think it's really hard for reasonable people to disagree that that's not going to be helpful for property values. That's not going to be helpful to make our community better, not helpful to make our community safer. So there are people out there who are fear-mongering, saying that this is terrible, that the process has been rushed, all kinds of BS for their own purposes. It's just simply not true. You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Every one of these projects has been vetted over and over again. We're still spending the next 5 weeks, almost every single night and weekend, giving people the information they need to be fully informed. The investment that this city needs, this is at a minimum. We need to do this to keep our city moving forward into the 21st century with technology and resiliency technology and beautifying our parks, and beautifying our streets, investing in our cultural assets. It's that important. So it's a great question, sir, and I'm glad you asked it. What is plan B? I will come back until we get it done. But you really got to ask yourself, why wouldn't you do this?
Is Miami Beach going to survive if this is approved?
I would not like to think of Miami Beach's future without this kind of investment. Take public safety. I invite you to go look at Station 1 in Flamingo Park. I invite you to go see Station 3. We have our Deputy Chief of Police who can tell you the importance that the security cameras that we do have in solving crimes. We've solved some horrific crimes because of these security cameras. We want to expand that throughout our entertainment district and possibly beyond. The amount of criminals coming into our city that have been caught coming into our city because of license plate readers. What new lighting throughout the city will do for us. Just look at your kids and the parks that they play in. And look at the neighborhoods whose parks are not up to par or that have not been built yet. And the quality of life of our children. It's that important. I mean, I'm telling you, this is, I started the year, I do New Year's resolutions every year. My number one goal this year was to get this thing done. It's that important.
Right.
Hi, my name is Ray Breslin. I'm president of the Collins Park Neighborhood Association. I moved here 21 years ago. This street out here was a shamble. People would walk from Collins Avenue to Shule, no sidewalks. People were parked in the dirt. The last GO bond made this neighborhood look like it does now. This is one of the most desired neighborhoods in Miami Beach, and everybody deserves the same thing. I was asked to sit on this GO bond committee, never knowing the amount of hours that were going to be involved to start with, but I'm proud that I did that. I'm proud that we worked from $1.some billion down to $439,000. These are the projects that are really going to make us be the world-class city that we are. And anybody that doesn't want to be in a world-class city, then why did you move here? Why are you here? Do you want to go back to the rocking chairs and all the people waiting to see God and all the hotels on Ocean Drive? I don't want to. I'm going to die someday, but I don't want to be in a rocking chair in front of a building that's dilapidated. So personally, I'm going to vote for the GO bond. I worked really hard on it.
Henry, you got a question?
I asked pointed questions before. Now I want to support you with Ricky. I live in Sunset Harbor neighborhood. A number of years ago, the businesses couldn't do business because the roads were flooded. On the king tides, October, November, you needed a kayak to get around town. Wherever the money came, we got them up 3 feet. And then John Alamon said, "You're not fair to the business owners. Connect the sewers so that they're not left high and dry with water there." So we've got good commissioners to help out. And now we're working on a state-of-the-art playground in our area.
And we got the garage that puts Sunset Harbor in the map.
Go ahead, speak up, lady.
Can't
hear you. Loud, Marilyn.
We had the garage built that actually put Sunset Harbor in the map and made us the neighborhood that we are today. And that was a joint venture with the city.
city.
And we were the worst neighborhood in the city.
My name is Jeff Donnelly. We are just looking at the document here. It's something like, if I'm reading it correctly, $7 million in annual expenses for, based on the parks bond. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Why should we think that future commissioners will meet that $7 million cost when past commissioners allowed many of our streets and sidewalks to go down so badly because they didn't want to fund and raise the millage rate?
Jeff, I gotta tell you, that's a great question. I'll give you my opinion on that, right? And I think everyone has an opinion on that. It's why elections matter. We gotta get good people to run. We have to support them. You have to hold us accountable. I ran, I didn't need to do this, and I've got a lot on my plate. And I was worried about the city that I love. I grew up in Dade County. I'm 50 years old. But I moved here 20 years ago. This is the #1 place that I wanted to live. I could have lived anywhere. But over the past 20 years, I've seen us sort of go sideways on a lot of things. While I see communities across the bay that didn't even exist a decade ago, booming. I mean, whether you see the Wynwood, who ever heard of Wynwood, right? And what's going on there. But, downtown, even Coral Gables, which is an old city, but is now enjoying a renaissance. The city of Doral didn't exist when I was growing up. These are major competitors for our residential dollars, for our tourist dollars, for our investment dollars. And these cities are, frankly, in my opinion, out hustling us in a lot of ways, and it bothers me. So I decided to run because I wanted to try to make a difference. For those of you who know me, I try to take bold action on big ideas that are difficult to get done, but that's what hopefully will move cities forward. So to answer your question, Jeff, is we have to elect people who worry about the long-term interests of the city and not their short-term political interests. And it's painful when you have to do these kinds of things, because if this passes this November, we won't start spending the money really until late in 2019. Most of the projects will be done, if and when I run for re-election, and if that's successful. None of this will happen while I'm a commissioner, right? You have to take the long-term view of the city and for its long-term health and do these things. That this is not short-term gratification for most of us. This is going to pan out over the next decade or two. And because in the past we've underinvested, we are now dealing with aging sewers and water lines and cracked sidewalks and inadequate lighting, etc. Elections matter. You have to encourage people to run. You have to support them. You have to hold them accountable. The bad ones you have to hold accountable. I mean, that's the only way you can do this. I mean, I don't have a better answer for you.
Can I just ask
I mean, listen what's happening at a macro level in Washington, D.C. I mean, our nation is struggling because they make short-term decisions and they're not worried about our long-term health. I mean, we've got deficits that all of us and our children are going to be struggling to pay.
Just to build on your answer, is there any mechanism that it will be built into the language if this passes to guarantee that future commissioners who are not part of today's vote or this month, next month's vote have to pay money for what was designated for?
I'll let John go first, and then I'll also give you a political answer.
Okay, just from a factual standpoint, we can't, let's say we have a parks project that came in under, and we want to move some of that savings over to a public safety project. We actually just can't do that. That's not even legal, just to give you an idea. What we could do is if we got a nice grant for a park project that's on the list, we could free up some of that money to probably go to another project on the list that might be coming in a little high. That's pretty common. It's pretty darn uncommon to take money that's committed to one of these 57 projects and not execute that project. Because usually that's when you come back to the voters 10, 20 years later for the next GO and they're going to hold you accountable to what was on that list. So there's repercussions, especially politically, to not following through on those things. And also want to give folks a little sense of comfort that a lot of thought, if this bond is passed, will go into sequencing the projects. Which projects go first? Which projects avoid now because FDOT is working on another project? Maybe there's a synergy with a project that's already going on. Or we want to limit traffic impacts in that area. There's a lot of thought that will go into it. I think somebody mentioned operating cost impacts to the city budget. So we'll try to layer those in over time to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a bind. So there will be a lot of thought. I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion, a lot of input, actually, from folks like you in this room once the bond is hopefully passed.
I have a question here. My name is Herb Frank. I'm on the board of Miami Beach United. So we all know about cost overruns, and I'm wondering what percentage of your expenses that you're going to be spending is planned for cost overruns.
One of the lessons learned from the last bond was that if you don't have a reasonable amount of money in your checking account for capital expenditures, then projects will grind to a halt if the cost is now pretty different than whatever it was once upon a time when the bond was approved. So one of our long-term strategies, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, is that we're going to try to grow that capital part of our budget over time. So then that way we get into year 4, 5, or 6, and to finish doing this project the way the neighborhood wants to do it, and to get that design that we're looking for, if that's going to cost an extra $1 million or $2 million or something like that, that we have the capacity to close that gap. See, because in our checking account, just like in your account at home, you probably have enough to do small repairs, to make small incremental differences, but you probably don't have enough to do the whole Spanish tile roof replacement that you're going to pay for. You might do a home equity loan for something like that. So by having the GEO bond money, we know we have enough to get real close to whatever that project's ultimately going to cost. And then we would make up the difference if needed. And oftentimes we're able to leverage grants, we're able to identify alternative sources of revenue. Sometimes we get matches, sometimes as well. So I feel really good that we would follow through on those commitments.
The other thing that gives me some reassurance, and hopefully will give you some reassurance too, is the way we've broken out this GEO bond, 3 different buckets: public safety, parks, infrastructure, and it's also further broken down by neighborhood. So you have South, Mid, and North Beach all getting pretty much an equal amount of money, and it's further to 57 projects, right? So citizens can say, hey, commissioners, you promised to improve, the Altos Del Mar Park. You promised to fix the sidewalk in my neighborhood, et cetera, because it's on the 57 list. The city of Miami last year passed a $400 million general obligation bond, and they did it, in my opinion, completely wrong, but voters supported it. And the problem that they're having now is they just put out a general, hey, give us $400 million, and then we'll figure out how to spend it. So they have not spent a dollar yet. There's not a shovel in the ground on any of the projects, and now they're going through the process of prioritizing and creating projects. So it's like a slush fund for those commissioners to spend. We did it the right way. We actually went, vetted, close to 100-something projects, got it down to a list of 57 with great detail, and so voters in future years can say, where's my project? When is that going to get funded? How is it tracking versus budget? We are going to have a GEO bond oversight committee like we did last time to actually make sure the money's being spent wisely, that we're not having major cost overruns. So there are protections. I will say, the longer we wait to actually start these projects, the more it's going to cost. And so we bumped into that issue with the 1999 year bond in some cases, because of political delay, projects got more expensive. We've learned that lesson, and so we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Hi, good evening. Kristen Gonzalez. I came tonight and I want to start off by commending Commissioner Arriola because I think he's worked very, very hard as the head of the budget committee, and I think that he believes wholeheartedly in these projects and the need in our city. And I think embedded in this bond, there are some worthy projects. That said, I'm going to vote no on these bonds, primarily because of the amount. $450 million is a lot of money, and when you have that much money in government, everybody's circling around these contracts, and it becomes very difficult to finish these projects efficiently and also oversight in these projects. And like Commissioner Arriola said, you know, once these bonds pass, he might not be here to oversee them, nor will I. And actually, as part-time people, we really do depend on the administrators, and we just don't know how efficient they're going to be in finishing them. My experience over the past 3 years has been that we have so many projects that we're working on. There's a perception that we are not constantly improving the city, but we are. Over the past 5 years, we have spent $300 million across the city in infrastructure projects. I think we built the first bridge that we've ever built that connected West Avenue, which was actually a great project. So we have been spending money on infrastructure. I would have rather us waited, and let me explain why. We have dabbled in these different projects, especially the most important infrastructure projects. I don't know if I need this. Over the last several years, and they really have been trial and error. They've been hit or miss. And what we finally decided to do was now go out to bid and get a dream team. And this team is going to have architectural experts, landscape experts, infrastructure engineers, civil engineers, and what we want to do is re-envision Miami Beach as a whole. Because what we found in these projects is that in some areas, we're going to have to plant mangroves. Some areas might be able to get flooded. Some areas, we're going to have to build up. We might have to use our golf courses. They might become lakes in the future. But does it make any sense for us to go out now? We have just put out the bid to assemble this dream team. And we don't know what the cost of this re-envisioning of the entire city's infrastructure is going to be. Bond the $500 billion before we get the plan, that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't, and so I have a concern about the planning involved in the project. I think we could do it better, smaller, in the future. My second concern is that over the past 3 years, I have voted continuously on zoning. More density, more height, more hotels, more tourism, and every single time the justification has been the same. We're going to make more money. We're going to make our tax base is going to increase, and we're going to have all this money. We're building the convention center. We're going to spend this $1 billion on the convention center hotel, and we are just going to be churning in the money. So as the residents, we absorb the traffic, the effluent, all of the crime and the dirt, all of the negatives that come with increased tourism and increased density. And now we're going to tax ourselves, and they're back basically going to tax us now to create their Central Park to improve their property prices. So we're going to absorb all of that. They should be paying for that. They shouldn't be taxing us to make those differences. So there's some projects in here that are worthwhile. There's some that aren't. 2 of us voted against it, myself and Commissioner Gongora. The reason we did vote against it was the arbitrary manner in that we were allocating millions of dollars in like the last 2 hours. There was a rush to get it on the ballot right now, 20 million here, 10 million here, 30. It was ridiculous. There were no estimates done, there was no serious vetting done on many of these infrastructure projects. And the third reason that I'm so concerned about this is because we don't know what's going to happen with our property values moving forward. Now the cat's out of the bag, sea level rise. Our real estate market is kind of on a downturn. None of us want to talk about it, but properties are going to be flat or on a decline over the next several years, while our budget has swelled tremendously from somewhere from $150 million to possibly $400 million in the period of 10 years, and we have spent every single penny of it. Okay, so we are in. We're in this situation where I don't know if right now is the time to bond this money. I would like for this red team that we're going to spend probably $1 million funding to go out, figure out what this re-envisioning of these blue and green spaces are in the city of Miami Beach, bring it back to us, and then bond that infrastructure. And do bonds more often, but less amounts, because let me tell you, there are projects across the city that are unfinished. Prairie Avenue is ripped up and in limbo. Indian Creek is a complete disaster. Anybody in the Mid-Beach Collins corridor will tell you that. Sunset Harbor, you know, there are some positives to Sunset Harbor, but there are some negatives too, and we're trying to figure that out. And I think we probably have a list of 50 capital improvements projects that we're working on right now that we have not finished to date. So I don't think we need to rush it, especially when we're talking about $500 million. So thank you for letting me go. And please do, I have no skin in this
There are
game.
3 bonds on there. Are you saying no to all of them? Or are you saying that you may turn around and say, public safety would
Well, what bothers me is that what bothers me is that there are certain things embedded in bonds that I would like, but then there's some things I wouldn't. So the way that it was designed is that it's very difficult to go yes on all 3 because there's certain large projects that all 3.
Christian, had you bothered to go to a single GeoBond workshop or a single budget workshop, you were too busy running for Congress, it would have been useful had you made your comments back in January when we were doing this, or February, March, April, May, the countless meetings we had. You were too busy running for Congress to actually attend any of those meetings to give us your input. So now it's a little late. So you're no one's going to convince you. That's fine.
Okay, so
Frankly, there's not more of it.
I'm going to ring this in. I would like to pass this on to Mike, who's going to ask an impressed question. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.
My name is Mike Reedus.
Can't hear you. Next one.
Closer, just
closer.
Hold it, closer?
Yeah.
My name is Mike Reedus, and I live in Mid-Beach. My question is basically, how did you build the numbers to get to these points? I'm not used to this. I'm kind of, I see some of the numbers are very high to me, and I don't know if you've got escalation in there based on when you plan on spending the money, or, you know, who did you use to come up with these numbers?
Yeah, so what we did is, on some of the projects that are already designed, there's several projects that have been waiting for years to get fully funded. So those, we have pretty darn good cost estimates for. On others that we know we're going to do in the future, we've used comparables of the kind of work we've already done, or we've contacted other folks in the market to get a sense for how much are we talking about cost per square foot, that kind of thing. We've tried to build in some contingency in there as well. And so, as I mentioned before, I think in one of the other responses is that if we get into a situation where, let's say 5 years from now, we're short $1 million or so on a particular project, and there might be several, right, that are around the same time, that's where if we have the strategy of increasing our capital spending in our operating budget, we'll be able to close those gaps as they come up. We can close some of those gaps now, but we can't really do sizable differences in it. And I think, you know, like the commissioner mentioned, we have, you know, maybe 50 capital projects that are going on at any given time, but a lot of them are very small, right? So if we're going to do like a $10 million fire station replacement, there's really no money anywhere to fund something like that. That is too expensive. It's the kind of thing that you have to finance if you're a city. And GeoBonds are the way we finance large capital expenses.
Just to give you a frame of reference, right? The city of Doral is going to voters this November on a $150 million bond ask just for their parks. That's a city that's barely 20 years old, that's got half of our number of residents, almost zero of our tourists, and they're doing $150 million just for their parks. The city of Pompano last year did $190 million. Of course, it's Pompano, not Miami Beach. So I mean, this is. The municipal bond market is over $1 trillion market. This is how governments finance long-term capital requirements. We're not reinventing the wheel here. This is, par for the course in municipal funding and finance on how we do things. So, to the gentleman's question earlier, like if we don't do this, we're going to keep trying. But if we don't do this, I mean, it's almost insane not to do this. You have to do this because our operating budget funds our short-term, daily operational requirements. Paying our police and fire, paying our city staff, just doing normal maintenance throughout the city. But to invest long-term, you have to borrow long-term. Just like you take a 30-year mortgage on a house because a house lasts hopefully a lot longer than 30 years. You get a short-term loan on a car because the car is a short-term asset. This is the same thing. For us to build police and fire stations, to improve our roads, to improve our sidewalks, to plant 5,000 trees, to finish our boardwalk, to finish our Baywalk, to build a new police athletic league for our children, to build parks. These are all long-term projects. We don't have the short-term operating capital in our annual budget. We have to borrow long-term. In contrast to my colleague who wants to wait, why would you wait when you know the Federal Reserve is telling you long-term interest rates are going to start climbing, right? We're looking at an inflationary environment. Credit ratings for us have never been better. To the extent that we pause and stumble and send mixed messages to the housing market, that we're not serious about our commitment to resiliency and property values start to crash, that's going to affect our credit rating. So why now? It's because millage rates are all-time low, credit ratings are all-time high, and interest rates are all-time low. Those things will not stay that way. It's only going to get more expensive, not less expensive. So the time is now, not 5 years or 10 years from now.
Let me just add on the credit rating angle that we've heard from Standard & Poor's and from Moody's that communities that will start to feel the impacts of climate change, that if they don't start mitigating and making some commitment towards trying to address those things, that they're at risk of potentially getting downgraded. So if you have a scenario where we don't make those investments, let's say a few years from now we got downgraded, it would actually cost us even more to do it at that point, and we'd have to pay more on debt service and less on bricks and mortar and actually getting things done.
By way of a very recent example, just last month, the city of Houston, voters overwhelmingly approved a $2.2 billion general obligation bond because of the horrors of Hurricane Harvey last year. And they realized they need to dramatically improve their resiliency infrastructure.
Gentlemen, good evening. My name is Jerry Perez, and thank you for being here, and thank you to the mayor and Commissioners Mellon, Mrs. Mellon, if he's still here. Thank you very much for being here. Again, I'm Jerry Perez. I'm the local advisory office here for this specific community in Miami Beach with Edward Jones Investments. And I want to just touch very briefly on what John was saying, and you almost answered my question. But just to bring a little bit of a different light from a different perspective into the room, if and when the bond passes, this will also be an opportunity for you, residents of Miami Beach, to also participate as investors. And this is something that could generate tax-free income. So helping invest in your city as you invest in yourself, hey, to me, it's something that we like. My office helps people do that. So feel free to talk to me or Google me, call my office if you want to get more information. What John was saying right now, which is very, very important, is credit ratings. Right now we're at all-time highs in credit ratings and all-time lows on interest rates. Do we have a preliminary on what type of interest rate are we looking for this one and what type of rating do we have right now?
We're expecting 4% next spring, given market conditions right now. So, that's pretty low. I mean, in other words, this is one of the cheapest ways to finance projects around, is the GeoBond. And I think you would agree that investors see municipal general obligation bonds as a pretty good investment.
What was the interest on the last GeoBond?
It was definitely higher. I'd have to check.
Yeah, it was 1999, I'm guessing 6%.
Just to give you an idea real quick on the millage rate, our millage rate right now is 5.888. The state limits us to 10 mils. The last time we did this in 1999, we were at about 8.9 mils. So we were much, much lower in the millage rate. And so you can't really have it all. You can't have the lowest millage rate ever and have enough money in your checking account to be able to afford these kinds of things. So that's a big reason why we're here.
Do we have a preliminary idea on the credit rate?
Credit rating? We're one notch below AAA, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so like one notch below AAA, which is the very highest you can get.
The reason we're not AAA is just because the risk, the inherent risk of an island and on the coast. So we're as high as we can probably be.
Yeah, I mean, the federal government would be AAA because they have a lot more sources of revenue than we do, and we rely heavily on property taxes and resort taxes. But we're as good as you can get. just by way of comparison, I don't know if you said this, John, already. If you look at the 35 municipalities in Dade County, right now our millage rate ranks 18th on that. So we're sort of very middle of the pack. We're not a heavily taxed city. If the GO bond passes, we would rank no higher than 15th. So we barely move anywhere. I mean, our millage rate is the lowest it's ever been. Even if you were to take the full 439 million down, therefore increasing the millage rate to its highest level, we'd rank no higher than 15 on that list. So right in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, and several of those cities on the list are like contract cities, are very small. You know, I wouldn't even use them as comparables to tell you.
Good evening, Jerry Goldstein here. Couple of questions. Fire Station 1 and Fire Station 3 need to be redone. Do you have new sites for where the fire stations will be?
Virgil, if you could also just help us understand kind of the conditions and the vision that you have for the stations.
Sure, excellent question. Well, we'll start off with Fire Station 3. That's probably going to be the easier one. Fire Station 3 would be in its current location. Now, we're limited to locations only because we have to be within our first alarm territories. A couple years ago, we had to spend somewhere close to $400,000 to mitigate mold at that station. It's a station that we've outgrown. It's right by the water, and we look at that area as an area that has potential growth. So that is one of the stations that we need to replace, and we would replace it in the current location. Fire Station 1, if we had to replace it today, it would go in its current location. We have no alternative site. The current site that we have is limited in the needs that we have. So if we were to use the footprint of that fire station, which currently sits next to the sewer pump, it's a forced sewer pump that forces sewer into Virginia Key. That place is limited, and it has limited. So if we build a brand new station over there, our concern in the fire department is that we're going to build a fire station that we would have outgrown immediately. So what we're looking at is some alternative sites. Some of them include private sites that we would have to either land swap or make an investment there, or look at some of the city properties that we have in that location. And so right now, 3 would stay where it's at, and right now, 1 would have to stay where it's at.
Thank you. Another question, I heard some stuff about this Bay Walk. Can you give me a breakdown, let's say, from Government Cup to 5th Street? The 5th Street Bridge that I heard might happen, let's say then from 5th to 11th and 11th up to Lincoln Road. So I know, I heard stuff that certain buildings were given variances and they were supposed to do a bay walk. And now they're saying no. There was lawsuits and stuff, so can you explain all this stuff to me, please?
It's a great question. I'm going to ask Eric to give you further detail. It's one of the things that I personally have been pushing very hard for to finish our bay walk and then also our beach walk. I think we have most of that sort of, the issue you raised about some developers that may have welched on their promise and assurances to us. I think we've worked out those issues. We've worked out a lot of the funding issues. The GO bond will help us further bridge a couple of the funding issues that we might have. Eric, you want to give us a sort of a state of the state on where we're at with each of them? I'm very excited that I think within the next couple of years we will have finished everything we've promised and been waiting on. The GO bond will definitely help us have that further assurance. We've made a lot of progress. Eric?
Can you hear me?
No.
Is that better?
Yes.
All right. The Bay Walk obviously was envisioned as a walkway for the public to take everyone from Government Cut all the way up to Lincoln Road. And right now, we have large segments of that that have already been constructed, obviously from Government Cut up to Fifth Street is complete. We are currently looking at how do we get pedestrians across the Fifth Street flyover in a better manner than allowing them or making them walk to Fifth and Alton and cross amidst all that traffic. So this GEO bond actually includes a Baywalk flyover coming across Fifth Street, and then it includes, I think there's 4 segments that are still missing from the Baywalk, not including the one that I think you were mentioning behind the Mirador and the Mondrian hotels, where we actually have already entered into a deal with that for 1240 West, and then you have one at the South Bay Club, which is approximately at 8th and West, and then Lincoln Bay Towers, which is up at just south of Lincoln Road. So those are the 4 segments that are included in this, and that would complete the Baywalk all the way from 5th Street, all the way from Government Cut all the way up to Lincoln Road. And with the pedestrian bridge that we have coming online, it would even give you an opportunity to connect over to the Sunset Harbor neighborhood as well.
Other questions?
Yes, Fred?
I don't have a question, I just want to add my 2 cents in this, because when the mayors, I served when the GEO bond came, the first GEO bond, I believe it was the first GEO bond that was ever passed. This will be the second. So at the time when Mayor Gilbert's dad was the mayor, I served with him.
As I like to refer to him, the good Gilbert.
Oh, he was a good mayor. He was. He was as tough as nails, but it was great to serve with him, and he had a wonderful personality to go with it. But the idea of a GEO bond came up only because this city had begun to awaken with the Art Deco district. The Art Deco district started to improve in the mid-'80s. This city was on the verge of bankruptcy prior to that. It was a lot of, as I tried to say before, Sunset Harbor neighborhood was a dump. You wouldn't go near it. It had a bunch of tow trucks. And nothing was happening until the Art Deco district started to do what it had to do. A sidewalk was built on Ocean Drive, and the cafes came, and this was the dawning of the city coming back. Now, many years have passed. I was thrilled that we're finally getting back to do this second one, because if you notice, there are things that are turning shabby, and nothing has happened to really improve a lot of it. Even though we were progressing because of the new tourism, there was a lot of bickering over the years. There was a lot of analysis paralysis, to quote the former mayor, and nothing was getting done. Here we had hundreds of thousands of tourists coming here to see us. People are building beautiful homes, and new apartments are coming. You know, the good and bad is the good and the bad is coming with it. Back in the days of the elder Gelber, myself, and a few others are not around here anymore, the GEO bond went to improve all of the vistas down in South Point and in the Art Deco district. Nothing was given to North Beach. North Beach was like not a place. I think a little of their beachfront was improved, but that's it. If you go down to South Beach now, you go onto the beaches down on 2nd and 3rd Street, They're beautiful walkways. The improvements along the waterways, there are so many things that happen because of little, and it was a little geo bond. I don't remember how much it was.
92 million, 92 million.
Kittens, and with the 92 million at that time, it brought the city back again. And now we're going to do the same thing. I feel so strongly that this is our second coming, to say the least, that we will now improve where we have come. And we have come a long way to the dumps and the dirt and the broken things and the dead wood in this city. So I'm speaking as myself, not as the co-chair of MBU. I just feel strongly that we really need to do this, and you're all going to be proud of yourselves when you see what comes of it. The derelicts, there was nothing on Lincoln Road. Remember? Nothing. Derelicts and emptiness. There wasn't a store open. There was nothing.
There were all the artists were on Lincoln.
Oh, that was after. I'm talking before.
No,
Are there any other questions? Does anybody have a question that's gone unasked or unanswered? Anybody going once?
Question.
Sorry guys, I tried.
My name's Ron Mayer. Who will determine what the priority of the projects will be? Is that special panel?
That's a great question. The commission will certainly have a lot of input on that. But a lot of it's going to come from the community. The commission can have a lot, especially the first sort of tranche, right, to get the things going. But we're going to look at sort of the most important, most sort of neglected things in our project pipeline and move those first. Certainly things related to public safety are going to go very early. Some of those are low-hanging fruit. We can get security cameras and license plate readers installed very quickly. There's pent-up demands in a lot of neighborhoods that have been waiting a decade or more for their projects. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Part 3, not too far from here, is going to go very early. There will be others that will meet those requirements, and then some others that will require further, vetting, engineering analysis, etc. The GeoBond Oversight Committee is obviously going to have a lot of input in this as well. But at the end of the day, the residents, we listen to you. All of these projects, none of these were cooked up by ourselves. All of these are the result of South of 5th Neighborhood Association wanting something, Mid-Beach Neighborhood Association wanting something, Ray's Group wanting something, and then these things percolate over the years. We try to meet them. If we can't fund them, they go on a master list that the city staff keeps. And then when we started this GeoBond process, we started saying, okay, what are all the unmet wants and needs of our residents? And that's how we started this whole process. So we started looking at the wants, which are the nice to haves, versus the needs. And I'm very confident telling you that the 57 projects are actual needs. They're not vanity projects. They're not like fluff. These are things we need done, in the very near future. So, we're going to try to be as aggressive as we can. But, this will be something that happens over the next, 10 to 12 years, I would say.
Jerry Goldstein again. I'm curious about what I thought I heard. Are we voting on just one giant bond issue, or are we voting on 3 separate ones? Like, we can pass police and fire, we can say no on parks and recreation.
That's
so
correct.
It's 3 separate.
It's 3 separate questions. 3 separate questions, and then with respect to the general obligation bonds, they're broken into 3 different categories that are typical of these kinds of situations: parks, public safety, and infrastructure. I hope you vote for all 3, because they're all 3 just as important. But you can certainly vote for one of the 3, 2 or 3, none of the 3, hopefully all 3 of the 3. Miami Beach voters, it's going to be a very It's an important election, not to get too political because of national stuff, but it's a big election, electing a governor, a new congressperson, state representatives, etc. The county is going to have a litany of ballot questions. The school board is going to have at least one, maybe more ballot questions. We have 6. The Inspector General, the Convention Center Hotel, what we do with the rents from the Convention Center Hotel, and then these 3 general obligation bonds. So, you know, we're worried about voter fatigue. So part of why we're out here making sure that people understand what they'll be voting for is we have a very long list of things to vote for in this election come November.
And I have some copies of the sample ballots if anyone wants one after the meeting, so you can kind of see where it is.
Jeff?
Yeah, you can get your sample ballot right now from the Dade County elections by going online, and you can get one that's personalized to your precinct. So you can look at it for the next 6 weeks and figure out what it is that you want.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna do it myself. I think it's important we all do it because there's a lot that is going to be on there. I think there's a bunch of state constitutional stuff on there too.
Yeah.
I don't know how many pages. I mean, it is.
There's county stuff, so it's really long.
Count is super long.
So we're really encouraging people to do mail-in ballot?
Mail-in ballots, yeah.
So that they can do it.
Yeah,
at
do
home.
it in the comfort of your home and take your time. Mail-in ballots, you know, and they'll start going out soon, so you got to put the request in soon. I'm not sure what the cutoff is. It's somebody
Cutoff
else.
date is like the 22nd, so they should get it in of October.
To request the ballot.
It's like the 6th or something, but they should try to request it in the next 2 weeks. or
Yeah, we got to get the word out. I know everyone here is a strong voter, but urge your colleagues and neighbors to get informed, because you're going to walk, if you wait till election day and you try to figure things out, you're going to get stumped. So start early figuring out how you're going to vote. And that's why my first question to everyone, you know, do you know how you're going to vote already in the Inspector General? Do you know how you're going to vote on the hotel and the geo bond? Because probably the last thing you vote on. They're literally the last thing you vote on when you go through all the elections and the state stuff and the county stuff and the school board stuff. You get to the city stuff last. You typically have fallout by the time, voter fallout. They just don't vote by the end. They get exhausted. So this is important. We have to push on all these things. If you're an advocate for the geo bond, the hotel, the Inspector General, you got to make sure people understand that it's going to be a long voting process.
Okay, so unless there are any last-minute surprise questions from the die-hard crowd, I'd like to thank Commissioner Ricky Arriola so patiently, and thank you all for coming out and being engaged, concerned residents. We appreciate it. And to the city staff, the fire, police, thank you, gentlemen.